Always so weird to me is, how slowly it is as people enter the room, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, we're generating a closed captioning. Wow, Alvin, you did that quickly.
Yes.
Okay.
So hopefully it doesn't get too noisy here. But if it does, I will try to find another spot.
Okay, we appreciate that. We're just waiting. We'll just wait one more minute as people enter the room, and then I'll introduce everybody. Gentle reminder, people, put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. And we really want to encourage you to ask questions of our authors here today. So, who are joining us from California and Saudi Arabia, and Joan is in Washington, D.C. So, all right.
Got the whole world.
We've got an international group here.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, time to begin. So welcome, everybody. I'm Susan Aronson. I'm a professor at the Elliott School of International Affairs at GW, and we are pleased to have a book talk on Our Next Reality, how the AI-powered metaverse will reshape our world. I just want to take a minute to acknowledge and thank our co-organizers, the XRA Association, the Center for International Governance Innovation, the Bridge, the Virtual World Society, and various institutes at GW, as well as the NSF, NIST, Trustworthy AI Institute for Law and Society. So welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Joan, who is going to introduce our speakers and introduce the talk. Joan?
All right. Yes. Thank you, Susan. I'm Joan O'Hara. I'm Vice President of Public Policy with the XR Association, and very pleased to be here to talk with the authors about their fascinating new book. Looking forward to receiving my copy. I've ordered it early. It's not published yet, but looking forward to reading it. So I think today's discussion will be fascinating.
Yay.
As we consider.
Well, the digital is already published.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry. I was having an audio issue.
Yeah. Alvin was saying that the digital version of the book just went live yesterday on Amazon.
Right. Great.
And the audio version is also went live yesterday on Amazon. And the physical book is available for pre-order. That'll take a little while for delivery, but yeah. So
good to know it's available digitally. So by way of introduction, I'm going to read actually a blurb from the book, and then we'll get into our discussion. So over the last 100 years, technology has changed our world. Over the next decade, it will transform our reality. We are entering a new technological age in which artificial intelligence and immersive media will transform society at all levels, mediating our lives by altering what we see, hear, and experience. Powered by immersive eyewear and driven by interactive AI agents, this new age of computing has the potential to make our world a magical place where the boundaries between the real and the virtual, the human and the artificial, rapidly fade away. If managed well, this could unleash a new age of abundance. However, if poorly managed, this technological revolution could easily go astray, compromising our privacy, autonomy, agency, and even our humanity. In their new book, Our Next Reality, How the AI-Powered Metaverse Will Reshape the World, Alvin, Graylin, and Rosenberg provide a data-driven debate on whether the new world we're creating will be a technological utopia or an AI-powered dystopia. And they provide guidance on how to aim for the best possible future we can. So with that, I would like to welcome Alvin Graylin. As we said, he's joining today from Riyadh. He is Global Vice President of Corporate Development at HTC. And Rosenberg, who is joining us from the West Coast here in the US, is CEO of Unanimous AI. welcome to you both.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course, yes. And to kick things off, I think it would be good for our audience to hear a little bit about what prompted you to write this book and take on this topic.
Yeah, so both Alvin and I, as well as many people, see the rapid changes that are happening in the world of technology as really the most significant transition that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, in terms of the pace of technological change and the potential impacts to all aspects of society, whether it's impacts to commerce, impacts to education, impacts to how we socialize, really impacts to everything. And we see that these changes are so powerful that they have the potential for really amazing positive impacts, and also really scary negative impacts or abuses. And so Alvin and I decided, we should write a book about this, but we should do it in a very balanced way where we cover both the positives and the negatives. And so we actually structured the book as a debate where on every issue, we cover both sides. Alvin covers the positive in terms of all the amazing things that can happen, and I cover the potential risks and abuses and things we need to be cautious of. I will say up front that we both have a pretty balanced view of the future. But we take our parts in the book to really have this dialogue throughout every chapter, so that we're not, it's not a book that's cheerleading from any particular perspective. It's also not a doomer book. It aims to be really very balanced, and the goal is really to provide guidance on how can we achieve the amazing possibilities and avoid the dangers as best we can.
Sounds like a realistic look.
Yes, that is our goal.
Right. Alvin, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the other thing is, one is that we're providing balance, but also to let the reader make up their own minds, because even with our balance, we have our own biases. So we're trying to provide as much data as possible. So it's all based on real research, real data, things over the last few decades that we've been in the industry. And lastly, at the end of the book, we actually have specific action items for different audiences, whether you're a policymaker, or you're a corporate leader, or you're a parent, or you're a student. What should you be focused on to prepare yourself and your organization for this coming future?
Well, the title of the book includes the word metaverse, which has been bandied about over the last couple of years. I work for the XR Association, which focuses specifically on immersive technology and thus the metaverse. I'm often challenged to sort of describe what is the metaverse. I think the simplest sort of explanation is it's almost like the internet, but in 3 dimensions and more interactive, and other things as well. But can you talk a little bit about what XR plus AI will mean for the internet and what that might look like?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the book, the definition we give is very similar to what you said, because of the confusion out there. Essentially, we're saying, look, the metaverse is not that complex thing. It's actually just the 3D version of the internet that we've been building for the last few decades, but now it allows you to go into it versus just looking at it through the screen. And us being animals that have evolved in the 3D space, it's actually natural over time that we would communicate digitally also in a 3D space. So that's kind of the idea, and AI would be what powers it. So that's why, in fact, the title of the book is AI Powered Metaverse, because without AI, pretty much everything that's happening in the metaverse would not be possible. From everything from the user interface to natural language processing to eye tracking to spatial awareness, all of that requires AI. And the fact that all of the AI right now is starting to accelerate and mature will make the metaverse a real thing much faster than it was possible just a few years ago.
But I think one key distinction will be how we interact with this space. I mean, currently we look at a screen in 2 dimensions, and pretty much we're using either our thumbs on our phone or a keyboard.
Yes.
this next iteration will have more natural interfaces, like just hand gestures, haptics, even like eye gaze can help to open a web page or what have you. Can you describe a little bit what that experience will be like and why it's better than what we have currently?
So
go
when we're
ahead.
talking about the really the future of XR plus AI, we can think of it as the future of the internet, but we can also just think of it as the future of computing and really the future of the human experience when interacting with digital information. And so I think that when we look out the next 5 to 10 years, we'll look back at today and we say we currently live in a world where we have our digital lives and our physical lives. And yes, they overlap, but they're also oddly separate. And so when you see somebody walking down the street today, staring down at their phone, bumping into things, that makes it pretty obvious that like these two worlds are not well integrated. Or if you go to a restaurant, you see a group of young adults sitting around and they're all just staring at their phones rather than looking at each other, which you'll see everywhere. Like that also shows like these two worlds are not very well integrated. And so when we look at XR plus AI, we're really saying these technologies, and whether we call it spatial computing or the metaverse or mixed reality, the direction is merging our digital lives and our physical lives into just one reality. And that's what we call our next reality. Our next reality is a world where when you're walking down the street or you're sitting in a restaurant, you can see everything around you. You can see other people, you can see the people you're sitting across, but you also can access and see digital information. And you can interact as naturally as possible. And naturally as possible will be, yes, eye gaze, and will be hand gestures, and will include haptics. It will also be conversational, which is another way that AI is really playing into this, because AI is now really launching this age of conversational computing, where we're going to be expecting to talk to our computers and the computers talk back, and it to be interactive conversations, which again moves us away from mouse and keyboard. Even when we're still in the age of just flat screens, we're going to be moving away from mouse and keyboards, and we're going to be going to websites that have a virtual representative, an avatar that's talking to us, that's AI powered, and that's going to be how we interact. And so really this combination of XR plus AI is moving us into this age when the boundaries between our digital and physical lives disappear, and we just expect it to just be one reality, and our digital lives is present around us. And whether we call that the metaverse or spatial computing or mixed reality is an open question, which is kind of why we just call it our next reality.
Just a reminder to the audience to any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them in about 15 minutes. Yeah, to your point, Louis, I've heard it referred to as ambient computing sometimes, that it's just sort of all around us all the time. And I think even with the Apple Vision Pro, the popularity of that easy pass-through, where you can sort of exit the fully occluded virtual world and re-enter your actual physical space, seems to be a popular feature. And I think the expectation is that more devices will be going in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it also goes beyond just the interface itself, because we definitely will be moving into more natural spaces, but we also will need to be much more interconnected virtually, so that you have virtual world you can go into that people are physically in different places, but that we feel together in a virtual space. So it's kind of the other side of that spectrum, where you're in a physical space and you have virtual things that are coming into it to augment it. So both sides of these use cases will increasingly expand, and they will increasingly merge onto the same device, and it will be a glasses type device versus the current like the goggle type device of the Vision Pro, which is much larger than it can be for an all-day wear device.
But I think the form factor, the size, the less cumbersome sort of vision of just having glasses, that's going to require some advances in engineering. So we're a bit out from that. Is that your?
I actually don't think it's that far out, and we'll actually approach it from the two sides. So even this year, you are going to see glasses type form factors with smaller field of view displays, waveguide displays that are already possible and less than 50 grams. So within probably a couple generations, that the two will probably start to merge. So I don't think people really need to be thinking that this is a decade away. It is definitely not that far away.
Also, one of the things that will really drive the adoption of glasses form factors is the recent advances in AI. And with multimodal large language models, these devices are about to get much, much more powerful. And so when it comes to large language models, we normally think of, we can enter text and it can respond to text. We can talk through voice to text. These multimodal models can take in not just text, but also video, images, audio, and again, we think of that as feeding it video or feeding it audio, but the most interesting application is when the audio and video is coming from glasses, and actually Meta is already doing this in their Ray-Ban glasses, where now with the latest AI they just released about a month ago, a little bit more, in real time, these glasses are capturing a view of your world. They're capturing audio of your world. And so the AI that's on this system doesn't even have to wait for you to talk to it. It can see what you see, it can hear what you hear, and it can give you guidance, or it can give you recommendations in real time. And yes, that will be enhanced with also giving you visual information. But a lot of this early augmented world will be audio, will be an AI that's talking into your ears, changing and giving you a very rich experience. And it will also include visual. And it's really the visual part where there are technical issues that will require the devices to advance over the next few years. But the AI, the real-time AI and the audio is made remarkable advances over the last really 12 to 18 months. And that the glasses space, I think, is going to really explode in the next year or so.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Although I do have to correct you on the current Ray-Ban glasses doesn't do consistent monitoring. You have to actually touch it and say, look at this and tell me something before it turns on the glasses. So I guess they have privacy regulation that, or at least internal policy against that. But there is a company called Vuzix that has a glasses called the Z100, which you can program yourself and have the glasses be on and the microphone be on all the time. So it depends on the devices, and it has a very small display that is more of a monochrome display, and it lasts actually almost all day. So, and that's available today. So these the advances in this area is actually going to happen a lot quicker than people expect, and I completely agree with Louis in the fact that audio only kind of experience, augmented experience, will be already very valuable as a tool to augment our intelligence and to make information more available.
Well, all of that sounds wonderful, but let's talk about some of the risks. I mean, you briefly mentioned the word privacy, at least, but obviously there are concerns around things like individual privacy, the potential for users to be manipulated, whether that's in disinformation or nudging them to buy certain products or what have you. These concerns have been around for a while with various types of technology, but now putting this all sort of together arguably enhances risks. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that would be certainly of interest.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we structured the book as a debate so we can talk about these issues, because there are, for every amazing piece of power that we can give people, there's potential for it to be abused. And when it comes to personal privacy and autonomy, there's really big risks. And you can just think about it in a simple way, which is, if I'm going to buy a product from a third-party corporation and that product can see what I see and hear what I hear and can then talk to me in my ears, I'm giving a lot of power to a potential company if there aren't guardrails, whether it's internal guardrails or government guardrails, to make sure that it doesn't get abused, because it could very easily be used as a form of influence. Especially if the business models around these technologies are advertising based, which is really selling influence. And the thing that makes this form of influence more dangerous than today's influence, because we already have, most major corporations have an influence-based business model, but traditional advertisements on flat screens are, pop-up advertisements that you can visually distinct, and you know it's an advertisement. If the mode of advertising is an AI engaging you in conversation that's talking in your ear as you're walking down the street and you see something, and it tells you, hey, you're out of this product, why don't you try this, and it's talking to you in your ear, and it's an AI that you've come to trust as an assistant, as a kind of a trusted part of your day. Those type of conversational interactions can very easily cross the line from marketing to manipulation, especially because these AIs are so smart. And so in a conversational context, whether it's coming from a screen or going into your ears when you're out in an augmented world, we really don't have guardrails. We just have never even considered this form of advertising in detail, where you're interacting conversationally to get information. And if a sponsor then wants to give you information conversationally, you might not even realize that you've transitioned from a friendly conversation to a piece of content that is sponsored. And if that's the case, you could very easily be manipulated. And again, it's interactive, meaning it's not just a canned piece of content that's coming to you. You will respond conversationally, and the AI could very easily be designed to overcome your objections. And so it will be like sitting across from a salesperson who's trying to overcome your objections, but this salesperson that you're sitting across from is an AI that has access to your personal data, potentially, about your interests and hobbies and likes, and so it can craft the conversation in a very skilled way. And it could potentially be trained on sales tactics and cognitive psychology tactics and other methods that could be very skilled at influencing you. And it has access to all the information in the world when trying to overcome your objections. So there's a really dangerous world that really needs attention. And so far, policymakers have not really understood that interactive conversational AI is a completely different form of influence, and we're just not prepared for it.
Yeah, and maybe I would add a little bit more to that. Now, I think what Louis said about the AI portion is very important. There's also the other portion of the immersive nature of XR medium, where you're essentially a multimodal way to put information into your brain. So the amount of influence you can create actually magnifies, right? So because you can use visuals and audios and other interactive models, even haptics, to allow you to generate memories that felt as real as being there. And so that allows you to manipulate people or the viewer in an even stronger way. And I think together with AI, those can amplify each other when used improperly by actors. So it is something that policymakers need to be aware of and prepare for.
On the visual side, one of the forms of advertising or influence that we can expect are virtual product placements, right? Just like in movies, there are virtual product placements, and they're sparse. But in an augmented world or a virtual world, a piece of, there could be a can of a particular brand of soft drink sitting on somebody's desk when you walk in, or there could be a certain parked car. And what's different from, say, a movie-based product placement is in a virtual product placement, it can be customized for you. Like you will see different product placements in the same room potentially than somebody else walking into that same room. And this will be a very unique form of targeted influence that, again, we're just not prepared for. We haven't policymakers and regulators haven't addressed this idea of not just product placements, but customized product placements that are using your background, your interests, your history to adjust the world for promotional purposes.
Yeah, and then we actually did some studies on this. Even without AI and customization, we were seeing between 3 to 7x the improvements in terms of the general advertising metrics. So if you add in advertising personalization, those numbers can go way up. So we need to, it's essentially the holy grail of advertising, but that also means that we need to be very careful how we apply it.
And to take it just the one step further, which is if a product placement becomes an AI avatar, right, becomes a virtual salesperson or spokesperson or character in this world that will actually talk to you, we can expect that we will be engaged in a very immersive way with characters that either look perfectly human or look very fanciful on purpose, and they can engage you in conversation with a goal of influence. And we can certainly expect that that could potentially happen also for kids, which is potentially the biggest risk. And one of the examples I often give is, what if you're a kid in a virtual world and a big friendly teddy bear walks up to you and starts talking to you, and it seems like your friend, it's engaging you. The technology exists pretty much now to enable that. But that big friendly teddy bear that's walking around with you, could have a promotional agenda. Could in conversation say, hey, I see you like dinosaurs. There's this great dinosaur cereal that you should tell your parents about. And as Alvin said, in an immersive world, it will feel more real and more impactful than seeing a commercial on TV. Like regulators and advertisers, they understand the impacts of television-based advertising, video-based advertising. When it's an immersive experience, face-to-face, interactive, feels real, the impact and the influence is going to be at a different level, especially for kids who already have a hard time telling the difference on television-based media between advertisements and non-advertisements.
Yeah, maybe we should go to another topic.
I think I saw this episode of Black Mirror a couple of years ago. No, seriously though, it's it is a bit chilling to hear these hypotheticals. To what extent do you think is it a matter of the public, the user, the future user, sort of wising up to this and being aware that there might be some I don't want to say ulterior motive, but there might be an advertising motive behind an interaction or something like that, versus the guardrails that you talk about and the role of lawmakers and policy to protect users?
I think it would be almost impossible for the user to recognize the difference without more transparency. So it's important that there is some type of a mandate that there is at least transparency in terms of letting people who are being engaged by advertisers that they are seeing advertising. Just like when you go online today, you'll see a little thing that says sponsored or ad next to a post that is a paid ad, right? And I think it should be the same thing when you go into virtual worlds, because everybody's going to be an avatar. So you don't really know. In fact, it may even be somebody that looks like your friend or family, which makes it even more confusing, especially now that you can have voice essentially mimicking to sound like anybody else. And so, without clarity, it is going to create a lot of confusion, and I don't think people can wisen enough to recognize it.
I think one of the things when thinking about the general public, and one of the reasons why I think it's important to educate people about the potential risks in a book like Our Next Reality, is that the public has the capacity to influence business models that companies pursue. And so, because there's really two different ways we protect the public. One is through policy, and that should be pursued. But an even better path is that if the public doesn't want to be advertised to in an immersive way, then the business models won't be advertising based. They very easily could be subscription based or other forms of advertising. And we really need to think back to social media, where the public was very happy to accept an advertising-based business model for social media because they didn't really understand that that could lead to negative outcomes and polarization and other things that happen when the companies are competing to see who can create the best forms of influence. And I think, personally, I think that these large companies that are developing these platforms, they don't want to create platforms that are damaging or dangerous. If the public would prefer a non-advertising based business model, then these companies can compete on who can make the most amazing magical experiences, and they're competing to satisfy the public rather than competing to satisfy advertisers. And so I think it's actually I'm hoping that we could go into this next generation of computing with just some awareness of what went wrong with social media, and think that, you know, advertising models where you get stuff for free, it isn't always free, and it's not necessarily good for the public or the corporations. I'm sure that the corporations that launched the major social media platforms did not want to have a technology that a majority of the public thinks is damaging. That wasn't their goal.
I actually think that technology will actually help us in this case, because what will soon happen is that we will have AI working for us as agents to go and buy things for us based on our needs, so that we go away from advertising rather than being influenced by an advertiser. Our agent will actually know our needs and then find the best prices, the best product, the best fit, and order it directly for us or bring it to us. So it's actually the technology serving the user versus serving the seller. And that will actually make, at some point, advertising, search-based advertising probably becomes obsolete, which is why Google was so reluctant to release a GPT type technology, which they invented, right? But then OpenAI released ChatGPT, which actually forced them to then release their competitive product. So in some ways, the technology may actually be its own savior in terms of helping solve this advertising issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of lessons learned, obviously, from social media over the past decade, and how the internet has evolved. But I'm sure there will be questions that we're not even thinking of today that we'll have to answer as well. And speaking of questions, we have a good number of questions in our Q&A, so I will turn it over to Susan to share some of the audience questions with you.
Okay, so the first question asks, if our digital and physical lives are integrated, how is our data kept secure? I'm going to type your answers.
Louis?
So that's one of the debates that we have in the book, which is whether this new future goes to a centralized or decentralized model. Right now, most of these platforms, most large tech platforms are centralized. Our data is stored by the corporations. We trust them to keep it safe, but they are also collecting data about us, and there's lots of potential risks. There's the potential to have decentralized models using blockchain style technologies, and in the book, Alvin talks a lot about that pathway, and I'll let him talk about that. The big debate we have in the book is whether or not we stick with today's models or we make a big transition, and when that happens. My view is that because there's so much momentum behind centralized business models, and because today's corporations makes really good business sense for them to keep data in walled gardens, it's unlikely to see a rapid change away from that. So I personally think that our data will end up being stored certainly for the next 5 to 10 years in very similar ways than we see it. But I'm hopeful that some of the models that Alvin describes in the book emerge sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Louis on the short term that, within, let's say, 2 or 3 years, we'll probably continue to do that. But I think gradually in different places in the world, we will see more either re-centralization to different places or a more decentralized model. Given how important this data, personal data is, and how much data will be collected, I think the users will also start to demand much stronger control over that data. And I think, in fact, this may be counterintuitive, but a place like China may actually be an example of how to operate this, where instead of having the corporations control the data, that it actually becomes more centralized to the government, and then the government will help you manage and keep it away from the private enterprises, which are more trying to sell you something, whereas the governments are more trying to keep safe the population. So I think there's a lot more detail to be discussed, but read the book, I guess.
Okay, next question, and please keep bringing those questions. What role should governments play, in particular governments in the global south?
I actually think that governments need to play a major role on two fronts. Actually three fronts. One is the regulation of how to control these companies who are both in the immersive and the AI side from becoming overly powerful. But two is that inevitably we will have major job displacement from this technology, more so from the AI side. And there needs to be UBI and safety nets so that the people who are impacted by this does not go on the street and have nothing to do. And then lastly, on the safety side, I think we actually need to have ways to ensure that bad actors who are trying to use this technology for harm, there are efforts to detect and to mitigate their activities, and to punish people who actually use this technology for harm. So there's kind of multiple aspects that the government needs to play an important role.
So I absolutely agree that governments have an important role, and we certainly are seeing governments have step up in the AI space more than we've seen them in other technologies. And my hope is that they realize that really the AI space interacts and intersects the XR space, because it's really the future of computing, not just AI. And the one advice I would have for governments who seem at least more on the ball this time than in social media 15 years ago, is that because this technology is moving so much faster, especially on the AI side, they really need to be thinking a little bit further ahead than they are. And we see efforts to regulate AI right now, and which is a challenge, but it's really about regulating today's they're focused on regulating today's problems, or even like yesterday's problems a little bit, as opposed to regulating tomorrow's problems. And they need to be focused on tomorrow's problems, because tomorrow gets here really, really, really fast. So
how do you do that?
Well, you have to be thinking a little bit ahead. Like right now, most of the AI regulation is focused on the fact that generative AI can take today's problems and deploy it at scale. So things like fake news, things like fake documents, these generative AI tools can create traditional documents at scale, look very, very realistic. That's a real problem. I understand the need to try to contain it, but that's thinking short-sighted, in that the way we're going to be influenced 5 years from now is not just through documents. It's going to be through conversations. It's going to be through interactions. And so we need to be regulating the technologies that we expect 5 years from now. We need to be regulating what is allowed in a conversational interaction where there's an agenda, where there's influence involved. Should that be banned altogether? Should there be restrictions or regulations? Should there be required transparency? If you're talking to an artificial agent about something through search, and it's going to now introduce conversational influence, should that AI have to say, I'm going to transition now to a sponsored message from so-and-so on this topic, so that and if transparency goes a huge way in allowing people to use use their discretion to understand what they should believe and what they shouldn't believe. But when advertising becomes conversational, it could so easily just be worked into a conversation. You won't even know what the sponsored content was. The same thing on data privacy. We think a lot about data privacy, and there's lots of regulation around data privacy. But again, regulators need to be realizing that in the next 5 years, people are going to be wearing these devices that are tracking not just everywhere that they go and not just everything that they see, but potentially their emotional reactions in real time. And so now you'll have data that is not just useful from an AI system to create a behavioral model, but to create an emotional model that they can actually profile you to know, oh, this person reacts a certain way to these type of stimuli because we're watching their facial expressions, we're listening to their vocal inflections, we're seeing their pupil dilations, and we can correlate that to everything they do and see and hear. That's really, really personal data, much more personal than we've ever collected on the internet. And so the policymakers and regulators need to be thinking that data is going to be so much more personal in the next 5 years as people are wearing these glasses everywhere, that it might change their view on what needs to be regulated and how it needs to be regulated. But if they're focused on today's problems, we're just always going to be behind.
Yeah, and there's one more thing that I didn't talk about is I think right now most governments are looking at only their own sphere, and they're seeing other governments as competition. I think this problem is big enough that we actually should consolidate efforts between governments to try to come up with a joint solution, whether to the AI, AGI, or alignment problem, as well as the infrastructure problem, to make sure that if we do have a global metaverse, how is the network going to support it? What standards are we going to use? What type of communication protocols? What type of identification standards? There's a lot of issues that require cross-border type collaboration for this to make it effective.
Preach, brother. That is the message of the hub.
Yeah, if I could just jump in with one thought before we move to the next question. Yeah, I think you really hit an important point there, that policymakers need to be thinking of an ecosystem of technologies. And I think too often it's very siloed. So it's like AI, let's think about AI and nothing else. And these technologies are all going to be working together to create these new experiences. So I think that's a challenge for those of us who are trying to educate policymakers to sort of change their thinking around that. But it's a really important point.
Thank you, Joan. How long until we think glasses are not tethered to a phone?
Glasses today are already not tethered for some use cases. So like that Z100 I told you about, that's not tethered. The Meta glasses is not tethered. There's a thing called the Brilliant Labs. They're coming out with a new display, AI glasses that's coming out next month that is not tethered. So the tethered ones are more for high resolution displays. If you're not doing high resolution displays, the tethered is actually not a requirement today.
And even they now have the ability to host pretty powerful AI models locally on these glasses, and we're seeing partnerships throughout the industry to go for these lightweight glasses that are not tethered. I think I would expect that in the next couple of years we're going to see glasses from many major companies through partnerships.
Yeah, although even though they're not tethered, there's still a lot of the processing actually is still either happening on the phone or in the network, and it's using Bluetooth or some other communication model, because the processing capabilities on these devices are just minimal to make sure the battery life is there. So even without tether, a lot of the processing is actually not necessarily happening on the glasses itself.
Thank you. Do you think policymakers understand the convergence of AI and XR?
No.
Some do, some don't. I think it's different, different parts different people, different parts of the world, but I think the bigger issue is that policymakers don't quite understand the transition of traditional media to interactive media. And I think that's even more kind of a more fundamental problem, because a lot of these issues can happen on flat screens. You can have a photorealistic avatar on a flat screen that is driven by AI and that you're interacting with. It doesn't have to be immersive for it to be a very powerful form of influence, or very powerful way to extract information from people. Like, again, to give you an example of like why this subtle difference of interaction is so important for policymakers to consider. Just think of like the experience of going to a website and filling out a form, right? If you're a buyer for a new car, you might go to a website. You might say, "Oh, you're interested in a new car," and I'll give you a form, ask you some questions, and you will give information. You might, when filling out a form, you might very deliberately not be honest about some things, depending on the information you're giving up. But you know that's that experience. If instead you went to that website and an avatar pops up and it's going to just talk to you in a friendly way, "Hey, I hear you're on the market for a new car." It knows something about you. It asks you about your favorite sports team, engage you in conversation, asking you about your driving habits. You're going to be giving up way more information than if you filled out a form. And it's going to feel like you gave up less information, because we're not used to interacting conversationally with other people and think that everything that we just said is now in a database somewhere being shared with other potential avatars that are going to interact with us. So policymakers really just need to put themselves a couple years in the future and just realize that things are becoming interactive, and they're becoming immersive, and they're becoming AI powered, and that just changes everything. Hey, Alvin, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so I think it's very difficult for us to say, "Oh, just put yourself 2 hours ahead." They act 2 years ahead. They just don't have that background. So this is actually why Louis and I wrote this book, because we wanted to make it very accessible. We gave a full background on the information, and we present it in a way that's digestible by essentially all levels of technology understanding. And so, if you have policymaker friends who we think would find this information useful, they probably need to spend a little time reading this book or listening to this book, and that at least give them a basis to make some decisions that will be coming their way very soon.
Thank you. I'm not sure I understand this question, but here it is. Will our next reality include long-term archiving of the kinds of records held by national, state, and other archives?
I'm not sure I understand what that question means either.
The person who asked it, could you reframe it if you don't mind? Okay, we'll move on till we hear back from that person, because we want to make sure that person is heard. How will education evolve to accommodate the cloud-based collective assistance and amplified intelligence associated with conversational language and communication?
Yeah,
to include
I think this is actually one of the brightest parts of this technology, both the XR and AI side. By putting it together, we essentially allow any child, in fact, even any adult who wants to keep learning, to have access to the best teachers in the world that is highly personalized and will take into account, all the issues that we talked about with advertising can be used for positive when you apply it to education. Because if you see somebody's excited or somebody's bored, you can change the content. If you see that this person responds better to one type of colors or one type of objects, or more to haptics than they do to visual or whatever, and you can adjust the content. So it allows essentially an all-knowing teacher to be able to present the content in the way that it's digestible by the learner, and to be delivered at a pace that is suitable to the learning speeds of whoever the learner is. So we will essentially give everybody a personalized one-to-one tutor that is all-knowing, and I think that is going to be the beginning of a new educational renaissance.
And a really interesting facet of this is that you could think about a virtual tutor that had these capabilities to read your emotions off your face, or your reactions and your voice, and be really essentially empathetic in terms of understanding what you're struggling with, understanding your challenges, even if a kid is not able to verbalize it. And I point this out because these technologies of emotion recognition and face recognition, like, yes, they have these risks, but they also have these really powerful benefits. And so the issue is not, hey, we shouldn't allow these systems to read your emotions. It's we need to create a scenario where people feel like they can trust it. They can feel like, yes, when these systems are operating in your best interest, they're trying to help. They're trying to help you learn. They're great. It's just we need to know that they won't be abused, or things won't happen without transparency.
Thank you. So the next question is about, is there a modern decentralized approach to possible training AI as a personal assistant? That is to say, could the AI engine be fully self-contained to each individual device?
Yeah, I mean, there are already micro versions of all the major models. Both the open source and the closed source models will provide essentially micro language models that can run on your own device, whether a phone or glasses or your local PC. So the ability to do that is actually already available, and they would only get better and smarter and smaller. So for personal use, this is actually, you could put in your database today and stick it into one of these 2 or 3 billion parameter models and have it run on your phone, and it actually works quite well.
Any other?
Yeah, that's definitely happening, and it is a potential way to protect people's privacy. Hopefully, it becomes part of a standard infrastructure that is very secure.
Yeah, but the important thing to note is that it will still be a gap between the capabilities of these smaller local models compared to the big cloud models. So it depends on your use case.
Okay. What about the role of 5 and 6G in the AI-powered metaverse?
Well, so I'll answer that since I'm from the telecom space. A lot of people when they built 5G, the big story was actually all of this, cloud streaming and cloud rendering, and it really just hasn't happened. That the networks have not performed to the way that we had hoped, and the user use cases actually hasn't also linked to it. Now, I think with 6G, you'll be able to get a lot more simultaneous devices out there. And the network should be better. One of the issues with 5G was the fact that when you're behind walls or behind fixed structure, the occlusion issues became much worse than existing networks. So the higher bandwidth didn't really result in the value that we had seen. But I think now that a lot of people are doing cloud gaming, it's kind of one step closer to that. And when we get to immersive medium, it's going to require a lot more bandwidth and a lot faster response rates or a lot lower latency. So the 6Gs, I think, will play a role, but 6G is still quite a ways away from real long, wide, broad deployments.
Anyone else want to add? What else may come up as the interactive device? I don't want to wear glasses all the time, so I don't want to have it as glasses. Says the question.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a concern a lot of people will have, especially until there's really an infrastructure where glasses have a wide variety of looks. Like, imagine, like, there's the Meta Ray-Ban glasses. They're actually pretty cool, but if everybody was wearing them, it would look pretty weird because they all look exactly the same. And so there is this big hurdle before we get to this place where everybody's wearing glasses, but there's also alternatives. And it goes to the point that I mentioned earlier, which is audio-based information, audio-based augmented worlds is potentially really useful. And especially if there's a camera that can see the world, whether it's always on or you choose when it's on. there are companies pushing those to be worn devices. Like there's the pin-based device and some other worn devices that have recently come out. I think that there will be potentially even just earbuds that have cameras on them. Because then at
There's
least
already leaks that says that the future version of the AirPods will actually have cameras, and people are like, "Why would you need cameras on your AirPods?" But this is one.
Yeah. So it's
Go ahead.
yeah, there will be alternate form factors for sure.
Yeah, although I think right now people are saying I don't wear glasses, but what will happen is that when this technology becomes more prevalent, if you don't wear glasses, everybody else does, you're going to be behind, and you'll be essentially forced to wear them. And honestly, the form factors will be much more comfortable and smaller, and less intrusive than some of the prior generations. So I don't think the concern of wearing something on your face will be as big as a lot of people may be worried about, considering that today about half of the people already wear glasses. So it is something that is a part of our kind of normal culture.
Yeah, just as an aside to this, so on this triathlon team that I'm on, there's this new product called Form, and it is an interactive headset of goggles for swimmers, and a lot of people have started to use it. It tells you if you're swimming, pretty flat in the water, your stroke rate, etc. So it's already happening.
Yeah.
And it's
Thank
waterproof.
you. Okay, we got a reframe of the question. Government archives keep their records for a long time, as the National Archives is an example. Will the metaverse enhance or hinder the process of keeping records indefinitely, given it's an awful lot of data? Will archives be a part of our next reality?
I mean, I'd be actually worried if the governments were keeping the archives and all the things that we've talked about earlier, everything from your emotional states to what you're looking at to all your voice. I mean, then you have zero privacy. I would rather that kind of information is kept on device and is erased when you don't need it. So that, but if you're writing documents or you're creating virtual worlds to archive those worlds for other people to use later, that makes a lot of sense. But things that are personal data that would be automatically generated, I would actually hope that is not archived.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that there will be, you think of like the Wayback Machine today, where you can go back and see what the internet looked like. Imagine that in an augmented world where you can say, what was this like last year? And just now you're going back into the past in a particular location. Yeah, I think it brings up the kind of a larger issue, which is just the massive quantity of data that that a purely augmented world will create, and also the need for AI to just to manage the creation of content in in a whole world.
Yeah, and although I have to maybe say that the amount of data may actually be not as large as we think, because a lot of it will actually be generated data. And if it's generated data, you could actually recreate it with the prompt, right? Or something to that sort. So from that sense, as long as you have the model, you could actually get a lot of the result without keeping, every single pixel of a virtual world.
Okay. And then what about the energy costs of this?
Yeah, so we actually have a section in the book about energy costs, and for AI usage, the energy cost is actually not as bad as a lot of people think. So when they train GPT 3.5, I think the total carbon footprint of that was about 3 cars. So it's essentially the lifetime carbon footprint of 3 cars, which sounds by absolute numbers like, oh, 3 cars for a whole lifetime is a long time. But if you look at the perspective of there's over 1 billion cars on the roads today, it actually is a relatively small footprint. Now, of course, GPT-4, GPT-5, it's going to take a lot more energy, but it's still in the order of, let's say, tens of cars or hundreds of cars, which are still a small I guess, impact in terms of its carbon footprint. But the value that it can create in terms of saving you energy, increasing productivity, would more than make up for those issues.
Louis, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think that it's definitely something that we have to worry about as the technology grows in size. These models get larger and larger, but it's potentially not quite as bad as people fear right now, at least.
Joan, you get to ask the last question if you'd like.
The last question of the day. All right, I have a fun question then as the last question. What's the killer app? What are we waiting for that's going to like really just set all of this in motion? What do you envision for the killer app?
So, I mean, I personally think the killer app will be real-time assistance in virtual and augmented worlds, where, because it will make us feel like we have superpowers. We have real-time support. I think there's creepy things about it and dangerous things about it, but I think it'll be the killer app, because as soon as a certain percentage of people have these virtual assistants helping them in real time, you will feel like you're at a disadvantage if you don't have it, and that will drive adoption very, very quickly. And so I think it will be the thing that drives a lot of these technologies to get used by large percentage of population.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with that. At the end of the day, what we've been doing with multiple generations of computing is just doing what we've already been doing in life, but just doing it in a maybe more higher efficiency way. And this next form of computing will essentially give us another way to do those same things, whether it's learning, whether it's working, collaborating, communicating, or entertaining. I mean, these are the basic things that all people have been doing since when we had sticks and fire, right? So it's it will just help us do those things faster, better, more efficiently. And and AI and immersive tech are going to amplify those functionalities.
Well, I'm so glad, from my perspective, certainly, as someone who works with lawmakers and policymakers, I'm so glad that you wrote this book. As you've said, the future is going to be here. It's right around the corner. So this is not something we're talking about decades out. In the next few years, things will look very different. So the way that you've presented these questions and, considered both sides of the arguments, I think is certainly very, very critical. So I will be recommending this book. And when I have my hard copy, I'll be bringing it to Hill offices to encourage people to take a look. But we're very grateful for your work on this. It's important stuff.
Well, thank you, Joan, and thank you, Susan, for organizing this talk. This has been a fun chat.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate the points that you made. I think there's going to be a hearing on Thursday about data, and it's basically about banning TikTok. What do we do about that? And your points, you both made some significant points that right now Congress is not considering. And I would urge you and Joan to think about how to get that message across, particularly Alvin's point about the failure to act internationally, and Louis's point about, well, both of you said this, but the interaction of these technologies and how they're going to change how we interact, how we buy, how we learn, and that they need to anticipate these things, something that's really hard to do. And nobody knows how to do it, but a systemic approach does help. Somebody I know wrote something about that. Thank you all for joining us, and who's ever left. Our next webinar is also going to be a book talk with Victor Meyer-Schonberger, and it's about AI systems. And basically, it's a very optimistic vision of guardrails. It's called Guardrails, and it's how we can think about decisions and design thinking, systems thinking related to AI as a system. So see you later. Have a great day,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Safe.